Well, welcome, folks. Sorry it took us a while. We just had some technical difficulties, as always, when we're trying to do things virtual. Welcome to our fourth and continuing series of Kitchen Table Conversations with the Men and Masculine Folks Network. I'm Pheng, using he, him, his pronouns. And for those of you who watched our previous three video series conversations, we're really talking about masculinity, manhood, violence, and current events, and how we as men and masculine folks really navigate our lives in the complexity of what's actually happening in terms of also promoting gender equity as well too in the conversations that we're having. So I would toss it now to my colleagues and dear friends here who are here with us so they can share themselves with all of us, and we will continue the conversation from last week. So go ahead, Felix.
Hello, everyone. My name is Felix Martinez. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I work for Casa Esperanza. I'm super excited to be here having this conversation and sharing a little bit of our experiences of how it's to be a man with a Latino in my case, and learn from each other and see how we can be better allies, advocates, and yeah, better men. Thank you.
And hello, everyone. My name is Ed. I use he and him pronouns as well. And I'm here in Duluth, Minnesota. One of the most beautiful fall days I could ever imagine. So it's a beautiful day to be alive, and it's a doubly beautiful day to be with the four of you and have an opportunity to talk about the things that matter and learn more about what we're learning about what it means to be men in the way that is needed for this point in time.
I'm Roderic, he and him, here in Minneapolis, one of the most beautiful days that I know that it's been, and work with the Met Council and the Women's Foundation of Minnesota, and eager as well to have these conversations.
And hey everybody, I'm Sean. My pronouns are he, him. I'm also in Duluth, Minnesota. Beautiful day, I agree, Ed. And I will be participating in the conversation and also kind of monitoring the chat now that we are officially live on Facebook. So definitely put in your comments and questions there.
Thank you, everybody. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. I think it's a continuation, like I said, of last week's conversation, where we were really focusing on community accountability, and we were really talking towards the end there about like the kind of ideas and notions of what it means to be a man in moments like this, right? In the current state of where we are in our communities and society at this moment. So I think towards the end there, we were really talking about how we are portrayed or seen as superheroes within our own communities and within our own lives, and that men need to be protectors and leaders in their community, and really continuing that conversation. So I want to also give Ed some time here to reflect from last week and then really start us off on the conversation on what is accountability.
Thanks, Pheng. Yeah, one of the things that I really appreciated in the first part of the conversation around community accountability was the way that the conversation moved into understanding the ways that men, understand their roles as protectors and as people who are in community to do good things for others, but that those roles that we understand are so often mixed up with that idea of needing to be superhuman, first of all. But then second of all, these ways that we've learned that what protection means or what safety means is equated to or is like the same thing as dominance and as violence, and that we see that in the way that that we the types of things that we silently approve of or allow to happen when it comes to policing in our justice system, which is disproportionately causing harm towards communities of color, and black folks in particular, and ways that militarization reflects this stuff, and that and I learned a lot about the ways that, like, I've learned about how a functioning, healthy, like thriving community can exist through some of the healthy ways that, like, family, for instance, has functioned, with people playing different roles, and everybody's leadership coming into being in the ways that are needed. So learned a lot about that, and the conversation, as it moved into accountability, we started to talk a lot about the importance of self-accountability, and then the way that is related to how we're held accountable by others. And so, in talking with Pheng and all the friends on the call today this morning, starting from a place of really asking, what do we actually mean when we say that we are accountable, and who are we actually accountable to? But starting from that place of, like, what does accountability actually mean to you? So is there somebody who'd like to start us out with that?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, well, how accountability look to me. I need to go from what you said, those roles, expectations, and how much that affect us, and how that, as a man, when you think about the effects that those roles, this expectation of men, how much harm it causes on us, and also on the women and girls when you're taking away their power and putting more responsibilities on the men and not being equal. So accountability for me is not being silent. Is saying things when they need to be said, and it's tough because a lot of the time happen in our own family and happen with even our elders, and there's some type of respect sometimes in our own families where maybe younger person are not allowed to tell an adult, for example, when they're wrong. It kind of causes us to be silent and respect them even when they're wrong. So I think it's very important to call out things when it happened, at the moment it happened, and create spaces where people are accountable for their actions. A lot of cases of sexual violence, it happened between family members, and the same families protect that individual that is causing the harm. So why that is happening? Why we're being silent and allowing that person to continue harming others? So it's very important to say what it say, but at the same time, I understand how hard it is because sometimes we don't have the tools. We don't know what to say, and that's one of the reasons why most of the men are silent, just because they don't know what to say. They're afraid of the response of the society, the response of their family, the rejection. That's something that will make us being silent. So I think now as a father, it's very important for me to step up as a Latino, call things what it is, and be aware of how harmful could that be. We see it in the movies, TV. So I think it's time for us to step up and stop being silent.
Yeah, I think about accountability as a process, and not so much as something where I just own up to what happened and what I did, and then that's about it. And because I think that that's often been my experience, and what I've seen is that men and masculine folks, oftentimes some of us will just own up, okay, I did it, okay, what's the next thing, right? Moving on quickly to the next thing of, like, what we want to do. And so it's sort of like this quick, easy forgiveness sort of a peace deal, and piecemealing things together. But to me, I think when I think about accountability, it's a process, and it doesn't have an end date at the same time too. And what I mean by it not having an end date is, like, you're constantly moving in a way where you're responsible to the people who are in your own lives, like in my own lives, right? where you're transparent and I'm transparent with those folks that are in my lives that I'm then responsible for and accountable to and in relationship with, and building, deepening my trust and respect and love with those individuals, and knowing that I'm not going to actually recreate harm or create conditions where harm can actually happen again. So really for me, it's really thinking about that in terms of accountability is that process that doesn't ever end, and understanding that when I do commit and participate in harm, how do I actually learn to not recreate those conditions, right? I think the saying goes that if you say sorry, you really, it better be once, and you better understand what you're going to do to not be sorry the next time again, right? And I think I've been in processes and in circles with men who have participated in harm, and they get off easily. And I don't think that it should be that easy, because we should really fully understand how we have participated in it, and then am I going to then create different conditions moving forward to not allow for that harm to actually happen again.
I think one of the things that I think about when realizing that I've got funny light, looks like there's a lightning bolt. I got like a Harry Potter effect going on here. And that's kind of cool. I guess I'll take it. But in listening to you all, I think about accountability. It's complicated and it's not complicated all at the same time. It's like, in some ways I think about it like the calibration of my internal compass, and whether my internal compass is actually calibrated towards goodness, equality, justice, the well-being of others in a way that is the calibration is actually with others. It's in tune with the experiences and the ways that that other people are feeling things and experiencing things, and that like a part of my accountability in order to be sort of okay in my own being, in my own skin, which actually has a particular meaning as a white man in this country, is that when other people are experiencing oppression, when other people are experiencing violence, when other people are experiencing harm or struggling to survive, that I'm in relationship to that. So like my at the very essence, my well-being is, my liberation is connected to that. But at a very concrete level, like what is my responsibility to people that I can actually reach out and touch who are hurting, and what is my responsibility to groups of people who are having very different experiences in this country than I am, with violence and with oppression and with harm. And so for me, that means like both listening to my internal sense of like the lack of balance and the violence that can come from the harm that other people experience, but it also comes from like listening, being in the position to understand that like there are a lot of things that I don't know about what it means to survive and to be well and do well in this country, when you have experiences with police, for instance, where you are afraid from the moment that an interaction happens, or the things that I know from survivors, like I don't have the perspective that survivors have about what it means to navigate both like male dominance and violence on a day-to-day basis. So when people who are experiencing those things or have experienced those things are saying to me, "You're missing the point," which happens pretty regularly. There's a part of my accountability is to listen to that, take it in, like take a beat, take a minute to let it settle in, and make my choices in the best way that I can in relationship to those folks, which sometimes means changing course, sometimes means listening and immediately changing. Other times it means that different people might be saying different things from different perspectives, but how do you actually, like, part of accountability for me is is holding it in relationship in the best way, and being willing to step forward in my decisions in ways that try to represent the best balance with people. And it's really complicated, and it's also as simple as that, balance and relationship at the same time.
And I know I want Roderic to also chime in and have some thoughts, but there's also a question for us, and I think we always welcome questions because we want to also be engaging with all of you who are participating with us, so it isn't just the four of us having this conversation by ourselves as well too, because we want to include all of you in the conversation. So the question is, what should accountability look like when someone has caused harm, and when do you think someone has been held accountable enough? So what should accountability look like when somebody has caused harm, and when do you think someone has been held accountable enough? That is a question from one of our persons who's engaging with us at this moment.
I would thank you for the question. I might touch on it a bit later. One of the things that can make it hard to share is when you agree with what everyone else is saying, and you're like, yeah, I think that same thing, and you have to think about, so do I just say it a different way, right? But I would say, I guess I would say, in terms of accountability, is I do think it is about understanding how you're connected pretty much in every moment. Because I think that sometimes we perpetrate harm when we think we're outside of the line of the broader community, or when we feel like we're not in community with people. So I think part of that is, as you guys spoke about, is having this sense of connection in the various moments in your life. And the other piece I think about accountability that I think is central is, and I think someone spoke of that, is being really clear that that as you're sort of in community and feeling connected, that you understand what harm is, right? Because we're swimming in a particular kind of masculinity, if you will, things come so naturally that if you're not really clear with other people about sort of what's harm, what's not harm, right? What does harm, what doesn't harm, then you can be perpetrating harm. And if someone's not calling you on it, and you guys aren't not just calling you on it, but having a conversation and getting to clarity about what that looked like, what it felt like, where it comes from, then you kind of can't undo it, right? You're like, oh, okay, and it can't be, I think, a standoff, like you think that's harm, I think this is harm. I think we're used to these sort of, okay, we just agreed to not agree. I think if we're talking about harming people because of sort of some of the ways that we're brought up, we have to spend that time getting on the same accord, right? So that's what I would say about accountability, which makes it, and so the question about what should accountability look like when someone has caused harm, I think it's hard to answer, because I think we kind of, I think masculinity, in some ways, you know, when we try to dominate and such, you kind of do that so naturally. It's just the space you take up, right? That you just kind of are clumsy about. You're going around smashing things, if you will. You're a bull in a china shop. You're going around smashing things, and that's just the space you've learned to take up. So I'm not really sure how to answer that question, but I think it's a great question in terms of what it should look like. And I'd like to hear what other people think about that question.
Yeah, I think on the, to me, on the point of like when accountability is enough, I think to me it goes back to what I shared earlier, is that I don't think there's a deadline to it. Because if we're really looking at these processes being transformative, right, and we're looking and understanding about transformative justice, I think Brene Brown said it best the other day when she talked to Violence Free Minnesota. I think she was hearing about how we have to create the conditions that allow for even people who create harm to believe that change is necessary, change is possible, right? So that means that in actuality, we have to fully be able to change ourselves, and that takes a long time, and change our beliefs and change the way in which we are in relationship to those around us. And it isn't just about a performance of like doing things, like you just do these things or I just do these things and then I'm going to be okay, or like that justice is served, or that I've changed now because I've performed and I've done and I've said the right words. So I think like what I've known to be true is that if you are a person who's caused harm and you go out and talk about prevention of sexual violence or domestic violence, you also have to talk about how you participated in it. And then you have to also talk about how and what are the steps that you're taking now in your own life to actually create different conditions, right? So it's an ever ongoing thing, but if we're only looking to fulfill the check boxes, then we will always ask the question, when is it going to be enough, right? And we get men who ask that question often about like, when is this going to be over with, right? Or what is it that she wants, quote unquote, from me? I've given everything, right? But if we're looking at it as a transformative process, and that it could be that, then that means that we're not going to no longer be asking that question, but we're going to be asking the question of, is what I'm doing, because it becomes a self-accountability question, is what I'm doing enough now, right? Is what I'm doing enough? And could I be doing more? Rather than, is what I'm doing enough? And when do I get to stop doing this accountability part? So I think that that's my thinking on that question of when is it going to be enough. I think for it's more nuanced, obviously, to me, but that would be my thinking around it at this moment.
It makes me think, I really appreciate what both of you shared, and it makes me think about how this sort of relates to the way that we talked about the myth of like superhero status last week as well, where we as men and masculine folks oftentimes are find ourselves in the position of trying to separate, like I will try to separate myself from the harm that other men are causing or the harm that other white people are causing, and hold as though I don't do that stuff. I'm okay. I'm at a level of okayness, and other people are causing this harm, right? And I think part of when we talk about accountability and when is accountability enough is there's like the recognition as a person who causes harm of the stuff that Pheng is talking about, where it's an ongoing process where it's always about how you repair what has been done and grow more and more and more and more into right and like mutually beneficial relationship with other people. And that's like a lifetime's worth of work. And then another part of it is the way in which community, and certainly in white community, we have like completely sort of stepped aside from our responsibility to accountability in community, and we've handed it over to largely violent systems in the police and the criminal justice system. But a part of this is that when people cause harm, they don't become not the community anymore. Like they're still very much in the community. Just like when we cause harm, we're still in families and we're still in community. It doesn't mean we get to be in the same kind of relationship in those communities and in those families. But a part of the question is for community, like how do you continue to hold people in such a way where you help ensure that the harm isn't going to keep happening, that people who can put energy and time into helping walk with people, guide people, hold a line and have expectations with people are are doing that, and that we move as community with people who have caused harm as well, and that the people who cause harm see themselves as a part of the community, and not in a relationship where it's like the light switch goes on and off. I'm on bad standing now, and now I'm on good standing. But in that process that that Pheng's talking about like growing into better and better ways of being in mutuality. And if I'm really honest with myself, and I've caused all sorts of different types of harm throughout the course of my life, and I'm on that process on a continual basis. Just like, you know, the guy who's maybe next to me in another process, like he might be more publicly in the spotlight for the harm that he's caused, or it might be a different or more violent, overtly violent form of harm. But I think it does a disservice for me to feel like I'm separate from learning how to be in community in much of a different way than he is as well. You're muted, Felix.
Yeah, now you're still muted, Felix. No, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh my God, yeah, technology. So I apologize. Let me see where I was going. When we're talking about accountability, it's very important. We're having a conversation and we're trying to make someone accountable. It's very important to see, do we want to be right, or we want this conversation to be effective, you know, because we know when someone's causing harm, but at the same time, we want to be sure that when we're having a conversation with the person, you know, we're effective. They understand, you know, the point that we're trying to reach, and be sure that we can create systems that allow us to grow up as persons and individuals. But that key part of being effective is something that sometimes when we say things, maybe that person that listening to us maybe don't understand, because they have their own perspective. They see things differently just because his experiences, his life. So I think for me, the effective part is what make me try to read more, try to listen more to other individuals, just because there's not a key that's gonna open the door and everybody will understand everything. It's more complex than that, and that's why sometimes it's hard to see change. You know, we have a lot of leaders who've been working in this field. They've been trying to end gender-based violence, and it's not an easy task. You know, it's something that starts from home, from our own selves, and you start putting that seed in our family so they can continue growing and hopefully living eventually in a world and of violence. But yeah, accountability is not easy, but together we can make a difference.
I agree, because I agree with you on the point that accountability isn't easy. And I think it's a really hard process to be in, because we're working with somebody's shame, somebody's guilt, trying to decipher that with the person, trying to also hold in position to that who they are and have compassion through that as well. Compassion in a way that doesn't collude with them recreating harm again in that process. And as men, and I participated in some of these circles before, these accountability circles before, that's what we call it. And we have to also know that, again, we aren't the ones saving this man, right? We aren't the ones saving this person who's caused harm, but we are in that process with that person. And we also have to see ourselves, I think, like what you shared, Ed, earlier, we have to see our story in that person's story as well too, right? Because if we're coming in there and I'm coming in there and I'm participating as if like I'm going to be holding you to it, right? Because I'm the judge and the jury. I think that that's a false setup, because it's not going to work. Because I have to also acknowledge how this process is going to actually be transformative for myself as well, not just the person who's participating in it, and not just the person who's walking through accountability. And so I think that has to be clear. The other part that has to also be clear is that it's a process in which it's not for everybody to participate in, right? Because some survivors and some victims and people who experience the harm may not want to be a part of that accountability process. And that's okay too, right? Because it takes having some compassion, not that they don't have compassion, but it takes having compassion to actually be able to sit with somebody who caused harm and listen to their story and listen to what has happened and what took place on their end for them to get to the place where they believe that this was the choice that they were going to make, which was violence or which was harm or which was like calling somebody out or touching somebody inappropriately or whatever the case may be. And I think that these are the nuances and the complexities that are involved in accountability. And I think that's why it takes such a long process. And it isn't just something that takes 3 months or 4 months or a month to be in, right? Because it opens up wounds, it opens up hurt, and people are in community together, and people are having a conversation, and then you're like moving in all sorts of direction, and there's a lot of moving parts, and it's not a smooth thing. It's just when I think about it the same way as healing. Healing isn't this like really fluffy thing and nice and cuddly thing that, oh, I'm going to be all great after this, right? It isn't. It's going to be painful. It's going to be regretful. It's going to be angry. You know, you're going to have anger in it. You're going to have some suffering in it. You're going to have frustration in it. All parties that are involved in it are going to have these feelings. And then there will be moments where you're going to laugh through it and you're going to be like joyful in it. But those are all real. And I think we have to be real about that when we talk about accountability and building accountability processes for us as men and walking through that, you know.
Yeah, I think you said it amazingly well there, Pheng. And I just was thinking about how oftentimes we think about both accountability and healing as though they're going to have great resolution, be wrapped up in a nice bow, and we can think about that from a community perspective, but we can also, I mean, I think it's really common for, you know, when I cause harm to somebody, you know, for me to want it to be, you know, resolved and put back into the perfect working order, whatever I thought that was at one time or another, put back into that place as soon as humanly possible. And the reality is that a lot of times accountability actually involves doing a lot of that messy, nonlinear, you know, internal work that you're talking about that's involved in both healing and in accountability. And it also means then like paying attention, you know, in my experience, when I've caused some of the biggest forms of harm that I've caused, like what I need to be doing is actually listening to what it means for people to be able to move forward in a good way. And a lot of times that means sort of finding the place where there's like an ability to have, you know, what I would call like a clean cut, or a place where there's like an ability to like move forward and in your different ways, and then to not have the resolution and the nice bow. And I think that just speaks to stuff that everybody's been sharing previously, but it's a way that we're not used to like thinking about or holding what you do in healing and in accountability. And it speaks so much to the fact that this is like, accountability is lifelong work. It's the work to consistently be in community and be in mutuality in better and better ways.
Yeah, and it's so hard, you know, when you were sharing there, Ed, I was thinking about like vulnerability. It's so hard for men and masculine folks to be vulnerable. To like, I think Jackson Katz says it, like letting your guard down and taking off that armor that you wear, that superhero cape, Oh Lord, I think that that's the hardest for men and masculine folks to do, is just being vulnerable. Just being able to sit in your own guilt and shame is just really hard. And being able to then let your ego come to that place where you're like, I'm just going to let go and I'm just going to listen, do that listening part that you're talking about. I think that that has been really, really challenging. It's really challenging and it's both really hard at the same time for men and masculine folks to do, because we weren't taught that way. We weren't socialized that way. We weren't thought about, we had to show strength and we have to show physical strength, emotional strength. And now in this process, it's like I have to be vulnerable in this process. What the heck? How am I supposed to live with myself, right? And what does that mean to my own sense of identity as a man? And working through that with men could be very powerful at the same time. And I think that that's why we so much need these spaces for men to be able, and masculine folks to be able to process these things with each other and be able to be real with each other, but be transparent and honest with each other, to push each other, right? And to really challenge each other on our thinking and our beliefs, right? Because we've been so conditioned, and we're conditioned it every day.
I think that the idea of vulnerability is so central in the sense of when you put vulnerability and healing next to each other, that is a really noisy place for people to be. And I think that when I think back to the question about sort of when do I get to move on with my life, I mean, the best answer is another question, right? That sort of is about your willingness to live with a changed self, right? And your willingness to be to respond differently to those things that caused you to abuse, right? And to and in big and small ways, because I think it really is those split-second things that I think cause all kinds of craziness to happen. And it is the inability, I think, to be present in those moments, to be present in those very moments that that allows all sorts of stuff to happen, but it also doesn't allow us to kind of come back and be vulnerable and be healing with the same sort of microscopic look, if you will, at the snowball that caused you to cause the harm. It's almost like we're more accountable to. So accountability is both two things, right? It is your susceptibility, if you will, or your accountability to things that you think are not masculine, right? To your concern about, that's what we're often in relationship to, rather than the other side. When I think we actually need to be in a relationship and then accountable to both those maybe fears that drive us, as well as the outcomes that happen, so that we can center our action sort of in this place of balance, which I think is somewhere in between.
Yeah, I need to. Yeah, that's the reason why we need to have this type of conversation with our sons and daughters, and start opening that door to let young boys say it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to cry. It's okay to make mistakes. We're all human beings, We can think, we all gonna make mistakes, but at the same time, how we can, give those tools to to our sons and daughters, how we can support them better, how we can support our communities to start that change that's needed at this time. We see it in the news right now. We see it everywhere. There's no way you can go online and don't be stressed to see what's going on, how we're battling each other, when we all should love, respect each other, and be focused and taking care of each other instead of battling for something that doesn't make any sense. We're better than that, and that's part of the change. That's part of being vulnerable and find methods and ways to support each other in a way that cannot cause more trauma, and it can, empower women and girls or our LGBTQ community and communities of color to be better. So I think, like I see in some of the comments, vulnerability is not a line, and it's so true. It goes everywhere, and we're better than that. I think having these conversations will help us to have a better view of, how can vulnerability be to each other and how we can start making that change.
I just think, even for me personally, as I listen to what we're talking about, and you mentioned, the way that we talk to the boys in our community as well, that a part of this is when we talk about vulnerability and healing and accountability, like
Hey, Juana, can I call you back?
It's taken me until I was in my 30s to actually sort of understand that regardless of whether I perform well or don't perform well, if I make mistakes and cause harm, like I'm worthy of love and connection and basic dignity, regardless of that stuff, right? Like that no matter how well or how not well I do, that I'm actually worthy of that stuff. And so like this experience of sitting in the shame or sitting in the guilt of having, messed something up in my work world, messed up something in my relationship world, messed up something in my family world, like that being in that guilt and shame is not a spiral that's about whether or not I'm worthy of my connection and my in my love with other people. And I think that that's something that is a part of the accountability that we need to teach to boys and to people in community overall, that even for folks who cause the worst harm, it doesn't make them unworthy of dignity and unworthy of love and unworthy of community connection. It might mean that those things need to change in their texture and the way that they actually are, but that like we do not replicate the violence and the degradation and all the stuff that somebody may have caused, and we don't replicate what we see from the state in that realm. At the same time, that's part of who we are together as community and our commitment to one another. And part of that starts with an understanding that we deserve that ourselves, or we start flinging it around at other people at the same time, I think.
Yeah, something that I know we probably might not have time for, but I would be very interested in us exploring further is like in holding people who've caused harm and walking accountability with them and the healing and the vulnerability that we're talking about. Like then how do we also ensure that we're also creating spaces and holding for the healing for those who've been impacted by that harm, right? And that these two things are parallel to each other and they may at some point intersect with each other. And at some point they may not intersect. I think it's definitely a struggle to be able, I think for survivors or for victims and people who've experienced harm especially from their loved ones too, is like that sense of like, moving forward and with their own lives and making the best out of it, right? But at the same time, what we know to be true is when you've experienced violence and you've experienced harm, something has been taken away from you that you won't ever get back. like that wholeness, I think that I'm struggling with understanding and trying to create space for is how do we move people in that, or what is the kinds of conversation we have around that, if any, that we can have. Because I think it's this constant struggle that I've seen at times with survivors and victims and people who experienced and been impacted by the harm, because it's a lasting impact, right? And that lasting impact then parallels with the question of whatever you're doing isn't ever going to be enough, because you should be always asking the question to yourself of, am I doing, what am I doing, and is it enough? Or should I be doing more, right? Because the harm that we've caused or you've caused as a person leaves a scar on the other person's life, and it's a forever scar mark that they themselves perhaps cannot get rid of, but they can heal through. And you can do your own healing at the same time. So I think these things are parallel things, and these are like critical conversations, that courageous conversations that we as men and masculine folks truly have to explore in creating transformative processes in our community, and in creating conditions in our community that allows for our folks and our people to actually live together. And I know it won't be this like kumbaya thing, because it's not ever going to be, but like, how do we give people like what we're talking about here, the tools and the skills to actually navigate those places and those pieces of tension, right? Because there are tension points that we're talking about here. So I just wanted to name those things and say at some point it would be really good to actually talk about that as well too, because in this conversation, and maybe like we're talking about people who've caused harm and how do we hold space for them, but what about the other folks who've experienced the harm on the other end, and how do we walk through that as well too? So any last thoughts? I know we're getting close to our time. Thank you for all of you for joining us and commenting and engaging in the conversations. We're definitely, Sean's monitoring the comments and sharing with us all here, and we appreciate all of that engagement from all of you who are joining us live in this conversation, and hoping all of you continue to join us, and maybe at some point one day also join us in this conversation live as well too. So give any last closing thoughts to Felix, Ed, and Roderic here.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I think vulnerability is a huge part of healing, and a conversation that needs to be needed in order to move forward, in order to do better for our communities and our families. So I'm very thankful for these conversations, and that this one and the future ones that we're going to have, and encourage other people to have these conversations at their homes with their loved ones. And and don't be silent. You know, it's time to step up and make a difference. So thank you.
Yeah, ditto. And I would say that, I think this piece about vulnerability needs to be asked more, because actually it is a question, right? Vulnerability is a way that you ask for information, right? And so I think we should just make sure that that when we're talking about it, we talk about it as an asset, right? As a thing that builds your capacity for masculinity, as opposed to something that takes away from it. Thank you for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you all. I love being in these conversations at least every couple of weeks. It would echo that. I see one of the participants said that vulnerability is really authentic courage. I think that that's a really strong statement. And one of the things that I'm taking away, and I appreciate that you just did, Pheng, is like, part of what we're talking about is how we hold the humanity and the hope for like what we can be together, both for folks in community who are causing harm, but also in in the holding of the humanity and the hope and the responsibility to the people who have experienced harm and what is needed there too. And so I really appreciate the way you're holding that in its complex balance.
Yeah, and just, you know, from my experience kind of listening behind the scenes this time, I'm just feeling, you know, very grateful that I have this group of people, you know, that I'm connected to people who, you know, whether we're here live on the call or those who have been watching and commenting and sharing, you know, I'm just really grateful that we're a part of a community that is asking these questions, that are really trying to figure out what that accountability looks like. And it's not easy and it's not one and done. But yeah, we're just, all of us, very grateful to be able to be together, to have these conversations, and to be real about how we're doing and what this looks like in each of our lives and in our own communities. And so again, we just want to thank you all for tuning in to this very first live conversation. Thanks for your patience in the beginning as we were getting it all set up. Always some technology things, but you all get that. And we also wanted to take a moment to thank our philanthropy partners, which are Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota and the Women's Foundation, for all of their support and partnership in these kitchen table conversations as we've been getting going. And then also a reminder for all of you that we are hosting these conversations every 2 weeks on Thursday at noon. They will be live going forward. That's noon Central Standard Time. And we encourage you to invite friends to join us. The more the merrier, as they say. We want to hear from all of you. So the next conversation is Thursday, October 22nd at noon Central Standard Time. And just as a reminder, if you would like to be a part of these conversations, make sure you like our Facebook page. You'll get all of the notifications about when we're live. You can also follow our page on YouTube as well. That's where you can also find our previous conversations if you want to get caught up and hear more of what we've talked about before today. So yeah, thank you again. Thanks to each of you for sharing all of your experiences and being real, and we will catch up with all of you in 2 weeks.